All right, so this is a change driven by Apple, I believe, and this is reminiscent of what they did to the FBI. Let me make this bigger for the recording. So many countries are trying to use cell phones to track where people are, to use them to track the coronavirus. And I see V that you want to present today. That's good. You can just share the screen from where you are. Anyway, that's good. Anyway, so many people want to make apps that will keep track of who has been infected with coronavirus and who has been near those people. And Apple and Google together have made a system where it would make Bluetooth connections from phone to phone, and all the data would be stored on the phones, and it would not store data on the central server. And it would also change the number every 10 minutes or something to make it anonymous. And Germany wanted a centralized mobile app, which several countries are going for, where there's a central server that knows everything about everybody. And a lot of people are nervous about the privacy of that. And the thing that caught my attention here is that this was called the Pan-European Privacy Preserving Proximity Tracing. That was the initiative started by Germany, and Apple's security controls make that impossible. They have security controls that will not let the Bluetooth data leave the phone, apparently, and Apple has refused to degrade their standards, which is just like what they did with the FBI. Apple has been positioning itself as very, very protective of user privacy. And so that's interesting. And so Germany backed down, and they're going to change it to a decentralized app. So Apple won. Anyway, it's an interesting issue. And Apple is really sort of shoving the world around with their very strong stance on user privacy. None of these apps, as far as I know, are currently in wide use, although some countries are requiring installation of them. There are quite a few apps to try to track who's infected and who's been exposed in various levels of development. Chile is the only country doing this yet. So they're giving people, this is what I wanted to get a few weeks ago, people who've had COVID-19 will take a test, and if they have antibodies, they'll then get a certificate saying you're immune, and now you can go back to work and nobody has to worry about it. So they're doing this in Chile, but the World Health Organization has said this is a terrible idea because even if you have had coronavirus, they do not know if that makes you immune. And another issue is that all the tests are extremely inaccurate, and they have a lot of false positives. So if you give people tests, it often tells them they have the antibodies when they don't. So they think they're immune and go out and catch it. So anyway, Chile is going against the medical recommendations there by doing this, and nobody else that I've heard of is doing this. Now there was something, oh yeah, so Small Business Association had a new round of small business loans, and the previous ones went really fast, and they made it first come, first served, and there's already a lot of scandals of abuse, the companies getting it that really shouldn't be getting it, and now the server just went down. So everybody knows they have to be first. They're refreshing the page, hoping it will come up. The banks are saying they can't get through. So it is pretty ridiculous. They can't even keep a server up, but that's where we're at. They don't seem to have any meaningful oversight to make sure the right people get it, or to make sure that anybody gets it, it stays up. It just seems like they're throwing money on the ground and letting people grab it and calling that a solution. Anyway, so this commissioner here went to a 2-hour Zoom chat. He's a Vallejo, California commissioner, and when he's done, he took his cat that was making noise and just threw it across the floor, out of the frame. So he had to resign after that, I think. Yeah, there was a huge argument that this was cruel to the cat. So you don't see that every day. And there's the point. The Federal Drug Administration, Food and Drug Administration, in order to make it possible to release antibody tests quickly, has relaxed reviewing them. So they've been flooding the market with a ton of tests, and a lot of them are not working very well at all. This is why I haven't bothered to get one and take one, because as far as I can tell, none of them actually work. There are 120 manufacturers. They haven't been reviewed. Many of them are now being accused of being highly inaccurate, and so it goes. It seems like there is no way to tell if you've had COVID or what that means if you have had it, whether that means you can't get it again. So Lord knows. Now, there's a huge push. States are reopening, like Texas and some southern Georgia and such. They're opening right away, and they're pushed this. Some companies have made websites and pushed this as a rebellion of the people demanding their rights, which is what Trump made it. But I think what it really is the companies want to force their workers to go back to work. And that looks like that is really going to happen. For example, if you have a job, but you're too scared of getting infected to go to work, then you'll lose your unemployment aid because you're considered just lazy and not doing your job. And there's another one like this. Yeah, McConnell. McConnell is holding back aids to the states. The states cannot borrow money, but the federal government can. And all the states are going to run huge deficits because of having shut everything down and losing tax money. And McConnell is holding it back, but he says he'll let them have the aid of the states if they indemnify companies, saying that people can't sue you if your company makes you go to work and they don't protect you when you get infected. So, yeah, well, that's, I think Ed's got it there. I mean, this is the protecting the big companies. And Richard Nixon, a Republican, a long time ago, he said this. He said the only purpose of the president is foreign policy. State internal policy in America is run by the corporations, and that's a pretty common Republican position. And in some ways, it's not necessarily wrong, but anyway, that's the way it is. So here's Israel saying the Supreme Court is worried about the privacy consequences of forcing everyone to install a COVID-19 tracking app on their phone. And they have ruled on Sunday that they must pass legislation if they're going to do that. They can't just order people to install this app. They'd have to actually pass some kind of law. They cannot just use their emergency regulations intended for anti-terrorism to force everybody to put the COVID tracking app on their phone. So we'll see what happens there. But this is the current big battle. It would seem like if you're going to open the factories and jobs and force people to go back to work, then you ought to give them some kind of protection. And hopefully they'll give you masks or something, like I know Amazon is now giving Whole Foods people masks and such. But it would be a lot better to think you actually have a system of tracking and contact tracing. But that would require an enormous hiring of people to help do the contact tracing, and nobody's doing that. So as far as I can tell, the United States has just decided to open up and have no protection and just let people get sick, which is what Britain tried and Sweden tried. They just have a high death rate and they just don't care. Britain had to pull back from it, but it is, as far as I can tell, the government position here is to just do it and then lie about it and pretend that we have testing and tracing when we don't. Anyway, not California, not San Francisco. They've announced the lockdown is going to continue through May 1 here. So our local, state and local governments here are protecting us far better than many parts of America. And here's the Vietnam's contact tracing app. This is their Bluetooth tracing app. And this company tested it and found, this researcher found, reverse engineered it and found that it is leaking unique identifiers that can easily be tracked back to people. So he told people, and they don't care at all, which is usually what happens when you tell developers about security problems. And so he explains what he's done. He said they don't understand how Bluetooth works, and it has a 6-character ID broadcasted over and over again, and so you can easily track people down. So we'll see what happens. They're predictable. Anyway, people are still using that thing. I don't know if they're being forced by law to use it in Vietnam, but anyway, it's not very anonymous. And I do not know what right to privacy they have in Vietnam. The right people, Americans do not have much of a right to privacy. It's a very indirect thing. There's not a very strong law, but Europeans do, which might explain why Germany pretty much gave in and decided to make a more private app, because in Europe, you really have to have a lot more privacy in your technology. And here's server-side validation. I thought this was awesome. So Twitter apparently has a gender ID field. I don't know quite how you see it, maybe if you go into information about a user, but there is a gender ID and you can add your gender. And what this guy did was he decided to use burp and bypass the client-side validation and see if he could put an unusual gender up there. So there's that, you can add your gender if you think male and female are not enough choices. So that would be good. So he tried putting in other things, up to 30 characters. So he put in the ICAR test virus, which is not a bad idea. It's a common anti-forensic trick. This means anybody that downloads a list of people with genders, their antivirus will throw the file away because this will be detected as a virus. That's one idea. But then he found that if he sets the maximum length to 255 in the browser, now he can upload up to 255 bytes. And then he found that they enforced a maximum length of 30 on the text input field, but not on the server. And you can put up a lot more. This guy put up his whole cookie clicker save, whatever that is, and people put up all sorts of things. He put the whole B-movie script up. You apparently can put up any amount of data in your Xender and just store piles and piles of data up there. And all these people have now putting an entire term paper up in their Xender and so on. So this is pretty good. This is what happens when you don't have server-side validation. Anyway, all right. And I think I won't bother with them. So here we are. We are here in the schedule. So today we got chapter 6, which is a short chapter, won't take me long to do lecture, and then people who wish to do presentations can do it. I have one taker so far who wants to give a presentation, and that's fine. Anybody wants to give a presentation? Anybody else? Good. 2 people. Good. Let me make a note. So V, might want to, I imagine I'll find his real name eventually, and Alex, good. You folks want to give presentations? That'll be fine. V is Vu. Okay, good. All right, good. So let me just do the lecture first, and then we'll do those presentations. So let me get my slides up, which are here. Okay. By the way, I assume you can all see the screen okay? I don't have any way to tell. You see the slides okay, right? You do. Good. Thank you. Good. Nice to check. A couple of times I was actually lecturing and the students couldn't see the slides and I didn't know that. I'd rather avoid that if possible. All right. So security assessment and testing. This, by the way, is really important, although it is a very imperfect process. We, as an industry, we lack good security metrics, which is a serious weakness of our industry, but that's where we're at. So you have access control. You supposedly have limits on your system. Administrators can do this, but normal users can only do that, and customers can do that. So there are different ways to test to see how good they are. One way is to pay a pen tester to hack into your network, and they might come in over through the telephones or the wireless or the network, or they might even physically pick the locks or otherwise sneak into the building. And all this tests to see if your access control is working. Then there's social engineering, the most deadly attack and part of all modern pen tests, where they trick your employees into letting people in the building, handing out secrets, letting people use computers and so on. So you can have tests where the people from the outside are not given any information, and some where you give them information about your network diagram and so on. 2 different ways to do it. So the penetration tests now have tools and methodology. There are network attack tools like Metasploit and Core Impact. And then there's a general methodology where you plan your attack, do a lot of reconnaissance, analyzing the company and the network and the employees and whatever you can find on social networks and wherever you go. Then you scan the network to find out what devices are there. Then you find vulnerable services you can attack. You exploit those vulnerable services and accomplish some sort of goal that's specified in your contract with the company. And then you write a report, which explains to the company what you did, how you got in, what recommendations you have to improve their security. So pen testers must ensure confidentiality of the data they accessed. You typically have to be bonded. You have to have insurance, for just like a lawyer, for malpractice. You sign a non-disclosure agreement promising not to tell anybody the vulnerabilities you find or the confidential data you might come across while you're wandering through the network. And the pen tester report is also confidential because, of course, it includes detailed information about the security of the network. And the whole reason you pay for a pen test is to try to find your problems and fix them so they don't become public scandals and embarrass your company. So obviously the pen testers have an obligation to maintain confidentiality, just like a doctor. If you go to a doctor and you have some disease you don't want the whole world to know about, like AIDS, the doctor must be trusted not to blab about it, or you wouldn't be able to get their help. So vulnerability scanning typically runs an automated scanner like Nessus, and this will just run a series of tests, sending different kinds of network traffic to the systems to find out if they have certain known problems. You have to manually verify whatever it finds. These scanners are notoriously sloppy and inaccurate. They miss things, and they very often flag things as vulnerabilities that are not really vulnerabilities. You have to go back and test them by hand to make sure that they're right. And then you have to think about the way the business runs to decide how important it is. This is the real value of a human pen tester, is to help you understand how important this is to your business, which a scanner is not smart enough to do. Because you always find too many problems, and nobody has money to fix them all. So they need help finding out, what are the top 3, the top 10 to fix, and which ones can I put off till next year, or maybe not bother fixing at all. All right, a security audit is like a financial audit. This is not trying to find some way in and exploit it, or running some kind of automated scan. This is testing against the public standard. You have a long list. You must have this and this and this. You must encrypt data at rest, encrypt data in motion. Every user that connects must have their own user and password. You must have logs of what everybody does. There must be regular auditing of the logs and audit reports, and all these things you have to have. So you have a standard like PCI DSS, and your security auditor inspects your company to see if you are meeting the requirements of that. All right, that's just. Then there's a security assessment where you look across many domains, your policies, your change management, pen tests, vulnerability assessment, security audits. There are many different dimensions to it to see if your company meets a known security standard. You can have an internal audit inside your company just to see if you're meeting your own policy, which is a good thing to do. And then you have external audits required to maintain accreditation and certifications, where an outside security professional comes in. There's a special, I think, QSI or something, QSO. There's special people you have to get who do PCI DSS audits. You have to have an external audit to maintain it if you have a large number of credit card transactions. And so these outside professionals examine you, then they give you a report explaining what remediation efforts may be required to maintain your accreditation, and then you have to do that and demonstrate that you've done it if there are things that are insufficient in the audit. All right, so another thing you have to do is review your logs. Like I mentioned, you got antivirus logs, intrusion detection system logs, you've got records of who's coming in the VPN, and authentication servers, routers, operating systems, application logs, and all these things have to be reviewed to see if you're discovering unauthorized activities. Your highly privileged users have to have a review of what they've been doing, because they can often turn off the logging systems and otherwise get away with things. So you have to have a high privilege audit to see what they've been up to. In order for this to work, you pretty much have to have centralized logging. If the logs are scattered on all the devices, it's far too difficult to analyze them. So typically you send them over the network to a central log management system where they all go in one place. The old-fashioned way to do this was syslog, the Linux product that would just send the data over the network. In UDP 5.14, now people use SIEM systems like Splunk commonly, and then it has collectors that collect data from all the endpoints and send it to a central point where they're all archived in one place, and there's a search engine that can find suspicious things and create reports of what you're finding in all that log data. All right, and if you're developing software, you have to test your software. So if you're programming your own software, then you have to secure it, which is really quite a burden. That's why a company I worked for, I was new on the job, the boss found me writing code, and he said, don't write any code. And I said, what do you mean? He said, just use standard stuff. We don't want any custom code, which was a surprise to me, but I came to see the wisdom of it. So if you write your own apps, then there is no vendor providing patches, so you have to audit it yourself for security problems. Static and dynamic analysis are two techniques. Manual code review is one kind of static analysis. Static analysis is analyzing the code when it's not running. Dynamic analysis is analyzing it while it's running. Another thing people sometimes do is pair programming, where two programmers work together, which tends to produce higher quality code because, of course, one person might think of a problem that the other person wouldn't notice. So static testing, you review the source code, look for unsafe functions, you run programs like lint that scan through source code looking for known dangerous activities. They check your compiler warnings that warn you about using old functions or unsafe functions. And then there's dynamic testing, where you send input and measure the output while the code is running. Again, there's white box testing, where you have the source code, and black box, where you don't have the source code. You can do it either way. There's a traceability matrix, is a system that matches the customer requirements to the testing plan. And synthetic transactions attempt to simulate real customer transactions to see how well your software performs under a simulated business condition. So there's different kinds of levels. You can do unit testing, where you test one component, like an individual function or an object, to make sure that it does what it should be doing. Then you test it, a freshly installed software, to see if it runs right from the start. And then you do integration testing to see if it correctly interoperates with all the other products that it has to work with. And you can do regression testing, which is a standard series of tests to make sure that it does what it should do. And then when you put on a patch, you repeat the standard tests to make sure it didn't break any important business function. And then there's acceptance testing, which is specified by your customer. Here's what the customer says: it must pass these tests or I won't pay for it. So you can do it by the customer or by the company developing the software. And fuzzing, a type of black box testing where you don't need the source code, although you can add extra comments to the extra functions to the source code to improve the quality of fuzzing. You just send a lot of data to the server and see if it crashes. This is a common way to find flaws in closed source products like Microsoft products. You don't have the source code, so you fuzz test it and you can still find flaws anyway. Then there's combinatorial software testing, where rather than just having a random series of inputs, you try to carefully plan inputs. So you can try to make sure that you have all input cases to try to drive the software into all of its edge conditions. And pairwise testing, where you have two parameters that you vary at a time to try to hit all the edge cases. If this one is big and that one is small, if this one is long and that one is invalid, various things like that, to try to just hit as much of the code as you can. All right, then there's misuse case testings, where you try to put in deliberately malicious inputs, which is what attackers do. So Microsoft's version of this is called threat modeling, and they highlight it in their security development lifecycle, where you try to define the possible kinds of attack that might come in. You're modeling what kind of adversary, what they might do. So your test has a coverage factor. This determines how much of the code has really been tested. This is another attempt to make a security metric. And the fancier fuzzers, like the Peach fuzzer, and I think there's other ones, they say they really don't cover in practice much of the code unless you actually modify the app and put in special clauses so you can force other parts of the code to be active, because normally there's a small bit of code that handles a normal transaction, and there's various if statements that handle exceptions, and normal business takes place only in the normal region. And unless your fuzzing is very carefully planned, it probably mostly stays in a normal region too. So if there are 10 if statements on the side, you probably only tested 1 or 2 of them, and the other 8 could have flaws that a more clever attacker could find some way to drive the code down to that part. And you'd really like your tests to test all the conditions that can be reached by input, but that's not easy. All right, so when you're done, you have to create results, and then making a report of what you did and what you found is relatively easy. Actually fixing the code and keeping it fixed is much more difficult. The most difficult part being, of course, that you have to actually organize your company so there is some orderly process of review and updates and recording what was changed and making sure that the next hired programmers understand what the new standards are and so on. And especially since you keep on absorbing new companies, and the companies who make the products you use are going broke, and it's real hard to stay up with all this. And you can see Microsoft is a leader, and you can see how many security problems they keep having. It's very hard to take a big, complicated, sprawling thing like Windows or Office and stay on top of all the things that happen. Anyway, so let's take a look at the Cahoots for this, which will be here. This is 125, 6. Good. All right. I'd get up to 6. We're up to 5. I'll give it a few more seconds and see. Oh, we're up to 6. Well, that is the theoretical limit, so we can start. All right. So what process would ensure HIPAA compliance? Compliance audit. You compare what your security situation is to what it should be. All right. What process goes over UDP 514? Syslog, centralized logging. It's not the review of the log, it just gathers the log data. All right, what happens after you update software? That's a regression test to make sure that no important thing was broken. And what does Microsoft highlight in their software development lifecycle? Okay, threat modeling is the Microsoft technique. All right, so I got JZ, which is probably real initials. CDH might be real initials too. And Foo is a real name. All right, so, all right. So let me stop this. And I'm going to stop the recording and let's